Hi, in this short video, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the importance of graphing and different types of graphs that you can use to represent data. To illustrate the importance of using graphs to represent data, I'm showing you here data from the World Health Organization, or WHO, and it shows different types of cancers as well as the incidence, or the number of cases of each of those cancers, and the mortality, which is the number of deaths for each cancer, and this is for the year 2012. Now, from looking at this data, it's a bit overwhelming and it's difficult to tell which cancer is the most common and which is the most deadly. If we take some of that data and put it into a graph, we would get something like this. We'd have the types of cancers along the x-axis and the incidence and mortality along the y-axis. So I'm showing you here the incidence in blue and the mortality in the red. Now, if you look at it like this, it's more clear that lung cancer is the most common type of cancer, at least for the year 2012. And that is also quite deadly because the number of deaths is pretty close to the number of cases. We can also see that although breast cancer is the second most common cancer, it is much less deadly compared to lung cancer because we have fewer deaths, much fewer compared to lung cancer and compared to the number of cases diagnosed. From this graph, we can also see that pancreatic cancer, for example, is not a very common cancer, but it is quite deadly because the number of deaths, the mortality, is almost the same as the number of cases, which is the incidence. But how do you know which type of graph is appropriate for a given set of data? So I'm going to show you 5 examples of the most commonly used types of graphs. So here we have a bar graph, and this one would be appropriate if you are comparing groups. So in this example, we have average exam grades for different groups of students. So one group sent 10 text messages during class, the other group sent 5, and another group sent no text messages during class. And so we can see here that it appears from the data that those who sent 10 text messages on average had lower exam scores compared to those that did not send text messages during class. Obviously, you'd have to do more analysis and you'd have to test this with a large number of students to determine whether the difference that you see here is statistically significant. But this is just to show you an example of what you would use a bar graph for. Another type of graph that's similar to a bar graph, but it's not the same, is the histogram. And here you're looking at the distribution of the data. So for example, here we're looking at the exam scores for physics in FIU, and this is fake data in the year 2004. And we have the number of students along the y-axis, so this is the frequency, and then the grade in the x-axis. So here we're looking, for example, in the first bar, this represents the number of students who had scores between 0 and 12.5, for example. And the next group, the next bar, is the number of students who had scores from between 12.5 and 25, and so on. So the last bar here, it's up to 100%, which is not shown in the graph, but this is the number of students who had scores above 87.5. So this is the type of graph that you would use if you're looking at the distribution of data and you have basically a continuum. So you have a series of scores. This allows you to organize those scores and see where most of the scores lie along that distribution. Another type of commonly used graph is the line graph, and this one is used to look at a change over time. So for example, here we have the number of cases of autism per 1,000 children from the year 2000 through 2014. You could also show this with a bar graph, but the line graph is also appropriate here because it shows you the trend, the increasing trend in the number of cases per year. So this is basically to show change over a period of time. The next type of graph is the scatter plot, which is similar to the line graph, but you're not connecting the dots in this case. And this is important, or would be used when you're looking at the correlation between two variables. So in this example, this shows height along the x-axis and weight along the y-axis. and we've plotted those values, and then we can add a best fit line, and this best fit line allows us to kind of observe whether or not there is a trend between the two variables. And finally, the last type of graph is the pie chart, and this is what you would use if you want to look at parts of a whole or the proportion of the different sets of data. So for example, here we're looking at the proportion or the percentage of different phylum of bacteria in normal individuals, so control individuals, and in different diseases like type 2 diabetes, IBS, and metabolic syndrome. And so you can observe from this that there are differences in the Firmicutes and Bacteroidetes mostly, and also in Actinobacteria. So those groups of bacteria, for example, Bacteroidetes is more abundant in the control compared to individuals who have IBS and those who have type 2 diabetes. And the Actinobacteria are more commonly found in individuals who have IBS as opposed to controls. An important thing to point out is where you decide to plot each of your variables. So you're going to put your independent variable along the x-axis. In this example, we have different types of paints that are used for boats, and these are eco-friendly anti-barnacle paints. This is just a made-up example. And along the y-axis, we have our dependent variable, which is the number of barnacles. That's what we're measuring, and we're observing if this changes the number of barnacles in response to a change in the independent variable, which is the type of paint that we are using. So remember this acronym, dry mix. The dependent variable is the respondent variable, and it goes in the y-axis. The manipulated variable is the independent variable, and it goes in the x-axis.